The war had raged for 20 cycles. To the Galactic Dominion, the battle was already won. The remains of the once mighty Krivath defense fleet floated lifeless in the void, their shattered hulls a testament to the Dominion's overwhelming force. The war was over in all but name. Admiral Vokran of the Dominion fleet stood on the bridge of his flagship, inexorable, watching the destruction unfold. The Kriveth homeworld, a blue-green jewel named Tarsus IV, burned beneath him. Fires raged across its continents, its once proud cities reduced to smoldering ruins. What little resistance remained would be swept aside within the hour. Vokran turned his golden eyes toward the main view screen, where his fleet's warships moved with mechanical precision, executing the final annihilation of the Krivath species. They had fought well, for a lesser race. But they had never stood a chance against the might of the Dominion. A comms officer turned to him, her posture rigid. "Admiral, we have intercepted a transmission from the Krivath command bunker. They are attempting to call for outside assistance." Vokran let out a deep, guttural chuckle. "From whom?" "Their allies are dead, their forces broken. Who would dare intervene against us now?" The officer hesitated, then swallowed hard. "It's a distress call directed towards humans." Silence fell over the bridge. Then, a ripple of uneasy murmurs spread through the crew. Vokran's chuckle faded. Humans. They were a minor species, a backwater civilization from the Orion Spur, technologically primitive, militarily insignificant. Yet, despite their irrelevance, there was something about them that set even the Dominion's warriors on edge. Their history was one of relentless expansion, of wars fought against impossible odds, and won. But this was different. Even humans had limits. Tarsus IV was light years beyond their reach, and no sane commander would challenge the Dominion for a dying world. Vokran waved a dismissive hand. "Let them scream for help. No one is coming? Finish the bombardment." The order was acknowledged, and the Dominion fleet resumed its final act of extermination. Plasma lances rained down upon the surface, reducing entire districts to rubble. The cries of the Krivath filled the Dominion's comm channels, pleas, threats, and final words lost in the firestorm. And then, it happened. A tear opened in space, directly above the battlefield. A breach in reality itself. It crackled with energy, warping light and distorting gravity. The entire Dominion fleet halted as every sensor, every scanner, and every mind on the bridge focused on the impossible event unfolding before them. And then, it arrived. A single warship, emerging from the void. Human, but not just any human vessel. The Leviathan. It was unlike anything Vokran had ever seen. Massive, black as a singularity, its armor plating shimmered with an eerie, predatory gleam. The ship bore no unnecessary ornamentation, no insignia, just a name etched into its hull in crude, angular letters, HSV Behemoth. For the first time in his long, blood-soaked career, Admiral Vokran felt something foreign slither down his spine. Fear. The bridge was silent. Every Dominion officer stared in disbelief as their scanners reeled in confusion. The human ship defied classification. Its power readings fluctuated in ways that should have been impossible. Its weapon systems were locked, primed, and calculating targeting solutions with terrifying efficiency. A deep, rumbling voice echoed across the comms, transmitted in perfect Dominion standard. "This is Commander Elias Kane of the human sovereign vessel Behemoth." There was a pause, a deliberate one, a moment designed to let the Dominion realize exactly what they were dealing with. "Cease your bombardment, withdraw your fleet, or be destroyed." Vokran's claws gripped the armrests of his command chair. The audacity. the sheer arrogance of these creatures. A single ship against the might of the Dominion's entire fleet? He bared his fangs in amusement. Foolish creatures. Humans might have been persistent, but they were not invincible. "Fire on the human vessel," he ordered. "Show them the price of—" The behemoth moved, not like any warship should move. It didn't drift, didn't adjust course with predictable thruster burns. It lunged as though it were a living thing. One moment it was beyond visual range, the next it was among them. And then the Dominion fleet died. It began with a single flash, a weapon unlike anything ever seen, not plasma, not kinetic, something worse. The Dominion battleship Indomitable, a vessel with armor thick enough to withstand the core of a dying star, ceased to exist in an instant. No explosion, no debris, just erased from the void. Panic erupted across the bridge. Officers scrambled to make sense of what they were seeing. A pause. Then, Kane leaned forward, his voice dropping to a quiet, dangerous tone. "Now you will see why humans don't lose wars." Vokren's blood ran cold. The behemoth's weapons came to life, and the slaughter began. Admiral Vokren had witnessed death in many forms. He had seen warships torn apart by railgun slugs the size of buildings, planets burned to lifeless husks, and cities vaporized under the crushing force of Dominion bombardments. But this was something else. The HSV Behemoth didn't just destroy Dominion warships, it unmade them. The battlefield became a graveyard in the blink of an eye. The Behemoth's weapons activated. Except they weren't like anything the Dominion had ever encountered. There was no visible beam of energy, no roaring cannon fire. Instead, the space around each targeted warship twisted. And then, without so much as an explosion, they vanished. The Vindicator, gone. The Relentless, gone. The Eternal Wrath, a battlecruiser that had survived 100 wars, reduced to nothingness. Vokren's mind reeled. He had never seen a weapon like this. It wasn't kinetic. It wasn't energy-based. It was something deeper, something terrifyingly efficient. A comms officer screamed, his hands gripping his console. "Admiral, the Behemoth isn't firing conventional weapons. They're using localized space-time distortions to erase ships from existence." Vokren turned, his fangs bared. "Explain." The officer's face was drenched in sweat. "They're manipulating reality itself. Our warships aren't being destroyed in the traditional sense. They're being removed from causality, like they never existed." Vokren's claws dug into the armrest of his command chair. This was beyond anything the Dominion had prepared for. His fleet was dying, and they had no way to fight back. More ships disappeared, their entire existence erased by the Behemoth's attacks. Within minutes, nearly half of the once invincible Dominion armada was simply gone. "This is madness," whispered one of his bridge officers, watching in stunned silence as the Behemoth advanced, gliding through the battlefield like a predator among prey. But Vokren wasn't done yet. He was Dominion. He would not let his fleet perish without a fight. "All remaining warships," he roared, his voice shaking the bridge. "Concentrate fire on the Behemoth. Give them everything we have." The survivors obeyed. The Dominion fleet let loose a final desperate volley. Thousands of energy lances, kinetic shells, and warheads surged toward the Behemoth in a last-ditch effort to bring it down. The sheer volume of firepower could have shattered a moon, could have burned an entire world to glass. And yet, not a single shot found its mark. The Behemoth's defenses were beyond comprehension. Every projectile bent away, curving into empty space as if the laws of physics themselves refused to let it be harmed. Dominion warheads detonated before reaching their target, as if space itself rejected their presence. For the first time in his life, Admiral Vokren truly understood what it meant to be powerless. A harsh beep echoed across the bridge. The human commander's voice returned over the comms. "Your fleet is broken. You have no more options." Vokren refused to accept it. "You think a single ship can end the Dominion? You think your—" Kane cut him off. "Your species believes itself to be invincible. You think war is something you control, something you dictate on your own terms. You burn planets. You exterminate civilizations." The human's voice lowered. "But you have never fought humanity. You have only fought those who could not fight back." Vokren snarled, fury and desperation mingling in his chest. "You are still just one ship. You cannot destroy an empire." A brief silence. And then, Kane laughed, not mockingly, not arrogantly, but in a way that sent a chill through every officer on the bridge. "You think we're alone?" Kane said, voice dripping with amusement. Vokren's blood turned to ice. A new alarm screamed through the bridge. Something was coming. "Admiral!" The sensor officer's voice cracked with fear. "Multiple FTL signatures inbound, hundreds, no, thousands of human warships." And then, the stars themselves seemed to shatter. One by one, the void erupted with white-hot breaches in space-time. And out of those breaches came the human fleet. Colossal dreadnoughts, each nearly the size of a Dominion battleship. Swift and lethal cruisers, their hulls reflecting the light of dying stars. Monstrous war machines, each one carrying enough firepower to erase a world. The United Terran Navy had arrived. It wasn't just a battle anymore, it was a reckoning. Admiral Vokren, the proud warrior of the Dominion, watched in absolute horror as the full might of humanity descended upon them. And for the first time in his life, he understood. The Dominion was doomed. Admiral Vokren had faced impossible odds before. He had led Dominion fleets against entire star empires, crushed rebellions that had festered for centuries, and watched planets burn under his command. But nothing had prepared him for this. The human fleet had arrived, and the battlefield would never be the same again. "Incoming vessels now at 10,000 and rising," a sensor officer choked out, his voice trembling. "They're emerging from slipspace fractures, but their drive signatures are unlike anything we've ever seen." The Dominion fleet was already in disarray, their forces decimated by the behemoth's impossible weaponry. But now they faced a storm of human warships, descending upon them like the vengeance of the cosmos itself. Vokren stared at the armada unfolding before his eyes. Hundreds, no, thousands of human vessels poured into the void, forming a wall of destruction. Their formations were tight, disciplined, not the ragged disorganization of a desperate force. This was not an improvised rescue mission. This was an extermination. On his bridge, Dominion officers murmured in dread. The Terrans had been considered a minor power, an upstart species barely worthy of notice. And yet, here they were, unleashing a fleet of warships bigger, faster, and more advanced than anything the Dominion had encountered before. "Impossible," Vokren whispered, his throat dry. A new voice came through the comms, another human, a woman this time. Her tone was calm, measured, but filled with an edge of cold steel. "This is Admiral Catherine Caldwell of the United Terran Navy. As of this moment, your fleet is in violation of Terran sector security protocols. You have engaged in genocide. You have committed war crimes against non-combatants. There will be no negotiations." A pause. And then, in a voice that sent a shiver through Vokren's bones, she spoke the words that sealed the Dominion's fate. "You do not surrender to us. You are simply erased." A moment of silence fell over the battlefield. Then, the slaughter began. The Terran warships opened fire, and the Dominion paid the price for their arrogance. It started with the dreadnoughts, their weapons unlike anything the Dominion had ever seen. Pulse lances of destabilized matter tore through Dominion shields as if they were paper, ripping entire capital ships in half. Destroyers moved like predators, their weapons firing with inhuman precision, slicing apart the last vestiges of Dominion formations. Cruisers deployed swarms of autonomous drones, each one a miniature warship in its own right, darting through Dominion lines and shredding anything in their path. Then came the behemoth. It had not stopped its hunt. Now moving through the battlefield like a reaper, it unmade ships with every pulse of its terrifying weapons. A Dominion battlecruiser attempted to flee, only for a rift to open in space before it. The ship never emerged on the other side. One by one, the Dominion's greatest warships vanished, their very existence erased from history itself. Panic tore through the Dominion fleet. "This is madness!" one of Vokren's officers screamed. "We have to retreat! We cannot fight this!" Vokren knew it too. His entire fleet was being annihilated. There was no strategy that could counteract this level of warfare. The Dominion had ruled the stars for centuries, but they had never faced a foe like humanity. His claws tightened. His entire body shook with a rage that could not be contained. "No," he snarled. "We are Dominion. We do not flee. We do not surrender. We fight until the—" And then his flagship shuddered. The entire bridge lurched as the ship was suddenly dragged downward. Emergency klaxons screamed in protest. Officers cried out as gravity buckled. Vokren gripped his console, eyes snapping toward the main view screen. And then he saw it. The behemoth was no longer firing weapons. It had changed tactics. Now it had extended a field of gravitational manipulation, a weapon so advanced, so terrifying, that it had ensnared his entire warship. The Dominion flagship, a vessel the size of a small moon, with armor designed to withstand entire sieges, was being dragged toward the behemoth like an insect caught in a black hole. "Admiral, we're losing control," an officer shouted. They're pulling us in." Vokren's snarl turned into a roar of pure defiance. "No, I will not be taken like this." But it didn't matter. The behemoth's gravity field intensified, and the flagship cracked. Not from external fire, not from some weapon discharge, but from the sheer pressure of reality itself, folding inward. Vokren's body froze as the bulkheads began to crumple. Panels ruptured, entire decks bent inward as the ship buckled under its own weight. It was not an explosion. It was not destruction. It was obliteration. And just before the flagship collapsed into nothingness, Admiral Vokren understood. Humanity had not come to negotiate. Humanity had not come to war. Humanity had come to exterminate. The last thing he heard was Admiral Caldwell's voice, spoken with quiet finality. "This is what happens to tyrants." And then, darkness. The Dominion flagship was gone. And with it, the last remnants of the Dominion's fleet collapsed into ruin. The battle was over. And humanity had won. The battle was over. The Dominion fleet, once an unstoppable force that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries, was gone. Where once thousands of warships had dominated the void, now only wreckage and silence remained. The HSV Behemoth and the United Terran Navy had done the unthinkable. They had shattered an empire's war machine in a single engagement. On the bridge of the Behemoth, Commander Elias Kane surveyed the aftermath. The once pristine battlefield was now a debris field of drifting corpses, broken Dominion warships, and the fading echoes of an empire's arrogance. "Tactical report," Kane ordered, his voice level, emotionless. His second-in-command, Lieutenant Mira Vasquez, turned from her console. "Scanning the remains of the Dominion fleet. No functional ships detected. Survivors are minimal. We are detecting some escape pods, but all major warships have been destroyed or erased." "Losses?" Vasquez allowed herself a smirk. None. Not a single human warship had been lost. Kane exhaled slowly. It was over. But this wasn't just a victory. This was a warning. The Terran fleet had made its debut on the Galactic stage, and it had done so with such overwhelming force that the very balance of power had shifted in a single battle. The Dominion was broken, its fleets devastated, its admirals slaughtered. But that was only the beginning, because now the Terran fleet had to decide what came next. "Incoming transmission, sir," Vasquez announced, glancing up from her station. "Admiral Caldwell is requesting secure line communication." Kane gave a nod. "Patch her through." The view screen flickered, revealing the hardened, piercing gaze of Admiral Catherine Caldwell. Her uniform was immaculate, her expression cold and unreadable. "Commander Kane," she said, her voice sharp as a blade. "Mission complete?" "Affirmative," Kane replied. "The Dominion fleet has been neutralized. Their flagship was the last to fall. The enemy leadership is dead." A brief silence. Caldwell's eyes flicked over the wreckage behind him, her expression unchanged. "You understand what happens next, don't you?" she asked. Kane met her gaze. He did. This wasn't just a battle. This wasn't just about defeating the Dominion fleet. This was about sending a message to every power in the galaxy. And that message was simple. Humanity had arrived, and they were not to be challenged. Caldwell leaned forward, her voice lowering to an almost deadly whisper. "We finish what we started." Kane nodded. "Understood." The Terran fleet wasn't just here to repel the Dominion's attack on Tarsus IV. They were here to end the Dominion, permanently. "Orders, Admiral?" Kane asked. Caldwell's eyes gleamed like a wolf's in the dark. "We take the war to them." Kane allowed himself a slow, satisfied breath. The real war was just beginning. The Dominion was crippled, its once mighty fleet shattered, its flagship erased from existence, and its military leadership annihilated in a single engagement. The galaxy had just witnessed the most one-sided massacre in history, and the terrifying truth was undeniable. Humanity was not just another species. They were something far, far worse. And now, they were preparing for the next phase. The United Terran Navy did not retreat. It advanced. Even as the wreckage of the Dominion fleet drifted in silence, the human war machine moved forward, engines burning like funeral pyres in the void. Hundreds of warships, battlecruisers, dreadnoughts, and the ever-looming shadow of the HSV Behemoth began forming attack formations, setting their sights beyond Tarsus IV. Their objective? The Dominion's homeworld. Commander Elias Kane stood at the helm of the Behemoth, his face unreadable as he watched the tactical map update in real time. The Dominion's remaining fleets, those that hadn't participated in the disaster at Tarsus IV, were still scattered across their empire, unaware of what had just happened. But they would know soon enough. And by the time they realized it, it would be far too late. "Admiral Caldwell has given the order," Lieutenant Vasquez announced, her voice filled with a cold sense of finality. "We are to begin Phase 2 immediately." Kane nodded. There had been no hesitation in Caldwell's words. The Terran fleet wasn't going to give the Dominion time to regroup, time to call for allies, time to comprehend what had just happened. This wasn't just a counterattack. This was an extermination campaign. "Prepare a slipspace jump," Kane ordered. "Full fleet deployment. Set course for Dominion Prime." Vasquez grinned. "With pleasure." The palace of the Supreme Archon, ruler of the Dominion, was built into the core of a massive, darkened fortress world. It had stood for over 1,000 years, untouched by war, never even threatened. Until now. The halls of power trembled as reports flooded in from the front lines. Officers and strategists whispered in disbelief, their golden eyes filled with dread. "The fleet! It's gone! No survivors? Impossible. We are the Dominion." At the heart of the chamber, the Supreme Archon sat on his massive throne, his claws digging into the stone armrests. His 4 piercing reptilian eyes scanned the battlefield reports, his mind racing through possibilities. No, this could not be. A single human warship had shattered the Dominion's most powerful armada. And then, an entire Terran fleet arrived, erasing what little remained. This wasn't a battle. This wasn't even a war. This was a reckoning. "Supreme Archon," one of his generals stammered, bowing deeply. "We must begin defensive preparations immediately. We must recall all fleets, fortify the homeworld." The Archon's voice was deathly calm. And what good will that do? Silence. Because deep down, they all knew. The Dominion had spent centuries thinking of humanity as insignificant, a minor species from the Orion Spur, too weak to challenge them, too primitive to be a threat. And that blind arrogance had led them to this moment. They had seen only a fraction of humanity's power. And yet, it had been enough to obliterate their strongest warfleet. What would happen when all of human space mobilized? The answer was horrifying. "Sir!" Another officer rushed into the chamber, panic written across his scaled face. We have just detected a massive slip-space disturbance." The room went dead silent. The Archon turned slowly toward the officer, his breath coming in short, shallow bursts. "Number not yet. Not so soon." The officer's voice was barely a whisper. "They're here." The throne room shook as Dominion Prime's orbital defense sensors blared warning sirens across the planet. The humans had arrived, and they were not alone. A rift in space split open above the Dominion homeworld. Then another. Then another. The human fleet emerged, cutting through the void like a blade pressed against the throat of an empire. There was no announcement, no warning, no diplomacy. There was only one single, chilling transmission, broadcasted across every Dominion channel, directly from the HSV Behemoth. Commander Kane's voice was calm, emotionless. "You should have left Tarsus 4 alone." And then, the Terran fleet opened fire. The Dominion homeworld's orbital defenses, massive space stations that had never fired a shot in anger, were torn apart in seconds. Planetary shields, meant to withstand decades of siege warfare, collapsed within minutes. Massive warships descended, their weaponry targeting not just military installations, but command centers, supply lines, and infrastructure. There would be no negotiations. There would be no peace. Humanity had arrived for one reason alone: to erase the Dominion from history. The Supreme Archon stood frozen as his throne world burned. His empire, the most powerful in the known galaxy, was dying before his very eyes. And there was nothing he could do to stop it, because this wasn't a war. It was an extinction. The Dominion homeworld was burning. In the cold vacuum of space, what remained of their once proud orbital defenses were reduced to nothing but drifting wreckage and corpses. The Terran fleet had arrived with one objective, and it was executing that objective without mercy. Human warships descended like reapers, their weapons carving through planetary shields, defensive batteries, and communication hubs. Every command center, every strategic outpost, every military installation, gone within minutes. The Supreme Archon stood in the shattered remnants of his war chamber, his golden eyes wide as he watched his throne world, the very heart of his empire, fall apart. This isn't possible," one of his remaining generals stammered. His scaled hands trembled as he scanned the reports flooding in from every part of the planet. The planetary shield was Was supposed to withstand a decade of siege warfare. It fell in minutes. The Archon didn't respond. He didn't need to. He knew why. The Dominion had never fought an enemy like this. They had never encountered a species that fought wars with such absolute ruthlessness. This wasn't conquest. This wasn't diplomacy through force. This was annihilation. "Sir," another officer gasped, his voice barely above a whisper. They're targeting civilian infrastructure." The Archon's head snapped toward him. "What?" The officer swallowed hard. "They aren't just hitting military outposts anymore. They're going after supply lines, power plants, industrial centers." A horrific realization clawed its way into the Archon's mind. The humans weren't just defeating the Dominion, they were erasing them. And then a new message came through, broadcasted across every Dominion channel. The holographic display flickered, and then he appeared. Commander Elias Kane, the face of humanity's wrath. His expression was calm. Too calm. His cold, piercing gaze locked onto the Archon as he spoke in perfect Dominion standard. "This is your final moment, Supreme Archon." The room fell deathly silent. Kane continued, his voice steady, without emotion. "Your fleets are gone. Your defenses are crippled. Your empire is collapsing." A pause. Then, "And now your species will suffer the same fate you forced upon others." The Archon stiffened. His claws curled into fists. No, you can't." Kane didn't even blink. "Your Dominion spent centuries erasing civilizations, burning their worlds, but you made one fatal mistake." The Archon snarled. "And what mistake was that?" Kane leaned forward, and when he spoke next, his voice was barely above a whisper. "You thought humanity was like them." Silence. "But we are not prey." The Archon's heart pounded in his chest. "We do not forgive." Outside, the skies of Dominion Prime darkened as Terran warships descended through the atmosphere, their hulls gleaming like obsidian death machines. "We do not negotiate." The first orbital kinetic strikes landed, entire city blocks vaporized in an instant, and we do not leave our enemies standing. The Archon watched in mute horror as explosions erupted across the capital, consuming buildings, monuments, and history in fire and dust. The Dominion was dying, and nothing could stop it now. The streets of the Dominion capital were a nightmare. Civilians screamed as the sky itself rained fire. Entire structures collapsed under the sheer weight of the human bombardment. Dominion warriors, once the proud enforcers of an empire that had ruled for centuries, fled like terrified animals. For the first time in history, the Dominion was the prey, and the hunters had come to end them. From the sky, drop pods began falling, metallic coffins crashing into the surface, slamming into the cracked streets with a force that shattered Duracrete. And then, from those pods, the soldiers of humanity emerged. Terran shock troopers clad in black adaptive armor, their faces hidden behind featureless helmets. They moved with precision, with purpose, their rifles raised as they marched forward without hesitation. The Dominion military tried to fight back. They failed. Human soldiers moved with terrifying efficiency, their weapons ripping through armor, through bodies, through anything that stood in their way. Tactical drones swarmed the streets, scanning, hunting, executing targets with mechanical precision. Dominion soldiers begged for mercy. None was given. Humanity had come for vengeance, and there was no room for pity. The Archon's war chamber was in ruins. Smoke choked the air, alarms blared, and his palace was collapsing around him. He had nowhere left to run. And then, the doors exploded inward. The Archon's remaining guards were dead in seconds, cut down by blindingly precise shots. And then, Kane entered. The human commander strode into the chamber with the same cold indifference as a god delivering judgment. His rifle was lowered but ready, his presence a silent promise of death. The Archon bared his fangs, hatred burning in his eyes. "You think this is justice?" he hissed. "This is genocide." Kane didn't flinch. "No." He raised his rifle, his voice calm. "This is balance." The Supreme Archon lunged forward in one final act of defiance. A single gunshot echoed. The Archon collapsed. His blood pooled across the ruins of his empire. His species' reign was over. Kane exhaled slowly, lowering his weapon. It was done. The Dominion, the once unstoppable empire that had ruled for centuries, was no more. Humanity had not just won. They had rewritten history. The Supreme Archon was dead. His lifeless body lay sprawled across the shattered ruins of his war chamber, his golden eyes frozen in a final expression of rage and disbelief. The Dominion was gone. And humanity had won. Commander Elias Kane stood over the Archon's corpse, his rifle still smoking from the single, final shot that had ended an empire. He exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the moment settle over him. It wasn't just another battle. It wasn't just another war. This was the moment the galaxy changed forever. "Sir, the capital has fallen." Lieutenant Mira Vasquez's voice came through his helmet's comms. Even through the static, he could hear the tension in her voice. "Remaining Dominion forces are surrendering en masse. Their entire military network has collapsed. What are your orders?" Kane's grip tightened around his weapon. This was the question that had lingered from the very beginning. What came next? For centuries, the Dominion had ruled with an iron grip, enslaving weaker species, exterminating resistance, and wiping civilizations from history. And now? They were the ones standing on the edge of extinction. Kane closed his eyes. This was not a mission of conquest. This was not about claiming new territory. This was a reckoning. He turned toward the shattered remains of the Archon's throne. Above them, the skies of Dominion Prime were choked with smoke, the once proud capital now reduced to ruins. The Dominion had burned countless worlds to ash. Now the flames had come for them. He activated his comms. "Status of remaining cities?" "Still in chaos," Vasquez replied. "Some of the Dominion's civilian population is trying to flee. Others are fighting to the death. They know what's coming." Kane stared at the burning skyline. The city was collapsing, massive skyscrapers toppling into the streets as explosions rippled across the surface. This wasn't just a defeat. This was an eradication. Kane tapped into the fleet-wide comms channel. "This is Commander Kane. Initiate full orbital bombardment." A long pause. Then Vasquez responded, "Are you sure, sir?" "There are still millions down there." Kane's expression was cold, unreadable. They had their chance. A single confirmation tone echoed through his earpiece, and then the sky turned to fire. From orbit, the Terran fleet rained destruction upon what remained of Dominion Prime. Massive kinetic rods, each one the size of a skyscraper, fell from the heavens, striking with the force of 1,000 nuclear warheads. Entire continents collapsed, massive shockwaves ripping across the surface as the planet's crust shattered beneath the relentless bombardment. Cities vanished in an instant. The Dominion's people, those who had stood by while their empire burned worlds and exterminated entire species, now faced the same fate they had inflicted on others. There were no escape ships. There were no final pleas for mercy. There was only justice. And by the time the bombardment ended, Dominion Prime was nothing but a lifeless rock, its surface reduced to a burning wasteland, its oceans vaporized, its once great civilization now nothing more than dust and echoes. The Dominion had been erased, and the United Terran Navy had ensured that they would never rise again. The war was over, but the message had only just begun. Across the galaxy, civilizations watched in silent horror as the news spread. The Dominion, the ancient, all-powerful empire that had ruled for centuries, had been annihilated in a matter of days. The humans had come, and they had not just defeated their enemy, they had eradicated them. Now every empire, every federation, every minor faction looked to Earth with a single, unified realization. Do not provoke the Terran race, because if you do, there will be no peace talks, there will be no negotiations, there will only be fire and death. And once the Terran war machine is unleashed, it does not stop. On the bridge of the Behemoth, Kane stood in silence as he watched Dominion Prime's burning corpse through the viewscreen. The battle was over. The mission was complete. Humanity had made its mark on the galaxy, and the stars would never forget what had happened here. Vasquez approached. Her usual smirk was gone, replaced by something more serious. "What now, sir?" she asked. Kane didn't answer immediately, because deep down he knew. This was only the beginning. The Dominion had fallen, yes, but the galaxy was vast. There were other powers, other empires, other species who had watched what humanity had just done. Some would fear them, some would try to challenge them, and others, the smart ones, would understand the simple truth that had been written in fire across the Dominion's grave. Humanity was not to be crossed. Kane took a slow breath. We rebuild. He turned away from the burning world, his eyes now fixed on the stars beyond. And then we prepare for the next war. The Behemoth's engines roared to life, and as the massive warship turned away from the ruins of the Dominion, the future of the galaxy had already been decided. The age of the Dominion was over. The age of humanity had begun.